R&D tax credit, make it permanent, and make it accessible for early-stage companies. I'm eager to hear what people think about this idea and hope they'll connect with me and my office and let me know how to improve on it, how to execute on it, and how to deliver this as a new tool in the toolkit of American innovation. With that, Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
And the Senate in a quorum call now as they work on FAA authorization through 2015. They're going to be taking a vote on that at 6:30 Eastern Time. And later tonight, after the Senate gavels out, we'll be bringing you the communicators at 8 o'clock Eastern. And that'll be on the automobile industry and Internet technology. And then later tonight, former Middle East peace envoy Dennis Ross. He'll be talking about Israel's position in the Middle East from the Aspen Institute. That was something from earlier today, and we'll show it again to you about 8:30 Eastern Time.
Senator from Kansas.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to speak as many as my colleagues have done.
The senator is reminded that we're in a quorum call.
I ask the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Mr. President, as I said, I rise today, as many of my colleagues have done, to speak in favor of the final passage of the conference report to accompany the FAA Air Transportation Modernization and Safety Improvement Act. I don't know what the acronym is for that, but it's a long name, but it's been a very comprehensive bill, very good bill. And I especially want to thank Senators Hutchison and my good friend from West Virginia, Senator Rockefeller, and their dedicated staff for the countless hours, Mr. President, countless hours they have dedicated over the past 5 years, to produce legislation that will provide the Federal Aviation Administration with the tools necessary, finally, to begin supporting a 21st century national airspace system. It's not often that you have a staff, 2 members dedicated 5 years to finally come up with a bill. Tough sledding, but they've gotten it done. The aviation industry remains one of the most important economic sectors in my home state of Kansas. Passage of this 4-year reauthorization is absolutely critical for giving aviation companies the necessary funding and regulatory certainty to move forward with a number of important initiatives. Not very often in today's world can you talk about regulatory certainty. This bill will do that. Specifically, the FAA Air Transportation Modernization and Safety Improvement Act includes provisions to implement a state-of-the-art satellite-based navigation system to provide operators and users of our national airspace the ability to seamlessly guide and locate traffic throughout our nation and around the world. It also authorizes critical funding for the essential air service programs, which provide Kansas and other rural states the ability to provide air service to smaller communities and the citizens and businesses whose livelihood relies on the ability to travel longer distances in a short amount of time. As a member of the House, as a matter of fact, even prior to that, as a staffer to a member of the House, I was part of the effort that established the first essential air service, so I have a long-time interest in this, and I thank, again, the senators for doing their very best to preserve this program. More importantly, this legislation reflects a bipartisan effort to continued health of the general aviation industry. This industry contributes over $150 billion, $150 billion to the national economy each year, has created over 1.3 million jobs. If anybody wants to hear about job creation, this is the outfit that does it, across a broad range of disciplines, and allows companies the ability to access all facilities all across the globe. And this is where I want to particularly thank Chairman Rockefeller and Senator Hutchison, as well as my colleagues on the Finance Committee, who were tasked with finding the necessary funding streams to pay for the annual $15.9 billion tag that this legislation does authorize. Notably, this legislation does not include language imposing disproportionate and onerous user fees on the general aviation industry. This is contrary to what has happened in the past. This has been a general agreement now, and rather this legislation preserves the current fuel tax levels, an efficient and effective funding mechanism that accurately reflects general aviation's use of the system. If anybody down at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue is listening, I would hope that they would adopt the same attitude as we have been able to reach in a bipartisan way and not pick on any particular industry or use their name or an acronym for their name about 6 times or 7 times in 3 paragraphs of recent speeches. Lastly, this legislation would not undermine steps taken at the Department of Transportation to protect private citizens from having their movements tracked by anyone with easily accessible flight tracking technology. So in closing, I look forward to joining my colleagues later this afternoon in passing this important issue, an important measure, a great comprehensive bill that will support more than 1 million jobs and help spur further economic growth and development in our nation's aviation sectors. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I recognize the absence of a quorum.
Mr. President, I'd ask the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise for a moment to echo, first of all, the words of the distinguished senator from Kansas. He was right on target in every point that he made. But I also rise to pay tribute to the chairman, Senator Rockefeller, and ranking member Kay Bailey Hutchison, Mr. Ray Hall from West Virginia in the House, and Chairman Mica in the House, who all did an outstanding job of bringing this together. You know, I was thinking on the airplane flying up here was an appropriate place to think. We're all on airplanes a lot, and I'm glad we got this bill done. I thought about the many bills I've been involved in my 13 years, now 14 years almost, in the Congress of the United States, but I don't know if I've ever remembered a conference committee that was so far apart and so divided that came together finally in the best interest of the American people than this one has. Senator Rockefeller, I want to pay tribute also to the Majority Leader, Harry Reid, who played an instrumental role in finding common ground to come to an agreement. Speaker Boehner in the House of Representatives did the same thing. This was a team effort. The National Mediation Board decisions that were made and the final agreements were good and they were fair. As Senator Roberts has said, the treatment of general aviation and commercial aviation, fair and equitable. We now have a 4-year plan for next generation. Everything that happened for the best, and it happened because of good leadership on the part of Chairman Rockefeller and Chairman Mica and Leader Harry Reid and John Boehner, the Speaker of the House. So I wanted to add my congratulations to the Chairman, my appreciation for his hard work, my thanks to all those in the Conference Committee for the work they did, and I'm very proud to have been a part of the solution that led to the reauthorization of the Federal Aviation Administration. And I would note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President,
Senator from West Virginia.
ask unanimous consent that the order of the quorum call be rescinded.
Without objection.
And I want to thank the disappearing Senator Roberts from Kansas and the ever-present Senator Isaacson from the state of Georgia, state of Atlanta, for their very kind remarks. And I really mean that. You know, you're two good people with a lot of experience, business experience, aviation in your... Is Hartsdale still the world's busiest airport? And the tremendous general aviation industry that you have, and that you come down and praise this bill means a lot to the Senator. Thank you both. I yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
And the Senate taking another quorum call as they work on FAA reauthorization through 2015. They'll be taking a vote on it at 6:30 Eastern Time in just a couple hours. The House approved the bill last week, and as the Talk Radio News Service reports, some unions are not happy with this legislation, including the Communications Workers of America, which represents about 10 million members. They say it would impede union efforts to organize. Again, that from the Talk Radio News Service. Over on the other side of the House, other side of the Capitol, the House coming back into session for legislative business with votes scheduled there at 6:30. And in the House, they're going to be taking up amendments to a bill that would create a centralized process to consolidate or sell non-military property.
Senator from Iowa.
With
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that Nora Gobelbecker, a member of my staff, be granted 4 privileges for the duration of today's session.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise today to express my concern about provisions of this bill that amend an unrelated labor law statute, the Railway Labor Act. As the chairman of the Committee on Health, Education, Labor and Pensions, which has jurisdiction over this law and the agency that enforces it, the National Mediation Board, I am troubled by the inclusion of this language and the implication that it creates, namely that this independent federal agency and the hard-working Americans it protects are being punished for recent regulatory changes that protects workers' rights. The National Mediation Board, or NMB as it's known, established in 1934, is an independent agency that administers labor relations in the air and rail industries. In 2009, this small 51-person agency went through a careful process to change the voting rules governing the elections that it administers. Under the old, antiquated election system, all non-voters were automatically and arbitrarily treated as a no vote or a vote against the union, regardless whether or not they actually opposed forming a union. These rules were contrary to the election rules used in the National Labor Relations Board supervised elections and different from the rules governing elections held throughout the entire United States, from school boards to United States senators. Think about it. If you don't vote, you're counted as a no vote. What kind of sense does that make? Made no sense. Just as it would be unfair to arbitrarily assign an individual American a position in, let's say, in the presidential race because he or she chose not to vote, it was unjust to capriciously impose a position on rail and aviation workers who, for one reason or another, didn't vote in a representation election. That's why the National Mediation Board adopted the common sense rule, the same rule that applies to industries all over America that are governed by the National Labor Relations Board. The rule was that in future elections, a voter's decision not to vote would have no impact on the election's outcome. Only those voters who actually participate will determine the outcome of the election. A majority of those who vote determines who wins. This basic system, as I said, of conducting elections works for school boards, for Congress. It works for all of the businesses in America that are governed by the National Labor Relations Act. And it will work and has worked for rail and aviation workers. The only entity that this new system apparently doesn't work for is the management of a few powerful airlines. These powerful companies don't want workers to have representation. They don't want to engage in collective bargaining with their workers. They're deeply concerned, I guess, about the remote chance that at some point in the future, they just might have to put a few additional dollars into middle-class workers' pockets. So they waged an unprecedented attack campaign to kill this rule, the rule that says that if you don't vote, your vote's not counted, yes or no. The only votes that count are those that vote yes and those that vote no. In the past, if you didn't vote, it was counted automatically as a no vote. Finally, people said, this doesn't make sense. No other business in America has any kind of rule like that governed by the National Labor Relations Board. So, these few powerful airlines waged an unprecedented attack campaign to kill the rule. First, they found some friends in Congress and tried challenging the rule under the Congressional Review Act, a law that allows Congress to overturn a rule through a resolution of disapproval. They lost that fight here on the Senate floor. Next, they went to court to challenge the legality of the rulemaking. Well, they lost that fight in the district court, and then they appealed it to the Court of Appeals, and they lost there too. So, then they waged a last-ditch effort to kill the rule on this FAA bill, which has nothing to do with it. Again, this was not in the Senate bill. The House put it on. A totally unrelated provision dealing with the National Mediation Board that isn't even a part of the FAA and which isn't in the jurisdiction of the two relevant committees. Now, the FAA reauthorization has historically been a bipartisan bill that is essential to the operation of our aviation system. As a pilot myself, have been all my life, I can see why this bill was needed, believe me. The current bill not only extends a wide variety of provisions impacting aviation, it helps to create tens of thousands of jobs and to bring our aviation system into the 21st century. This important legislation has absolutely nothing to do with the National Mediation Board, whose sole job is to oversee labor relations. But last year, House Republicans tried to turn this FAA reauthorization bill into a vehicle to attack workers' rights. They added a provision to their bill repealing the National Mediation Board's election rule, the rule which said that if you don't vote, it's not counted. It's not counted as a no vote or yes vote, it's just not counted. A common sense rule. Well, then, when the House and Senate bills were in conference last year, they refused to pass a clean extension of the FAA laws, as had been done on more than 20 occasions prior. And since they didn't do that, they stopped the conference negotiations. Instead, the House forced a partial shutdown of the FAA. That shutdown last summer left 4,000 FAA workers furloughed, put many thousands more people out of work in airport construction, cut off FAA reimbursement payments to small businesses across the country. It cost the government about $25 million in tax revenues every single day, just because the House was attacking workers' rights. They wanted to add this onerous provision to the FAA bill. Now, while frustrating, it has long been the norm here to keep agencies operating with short-term extensions while bills whose terms have not been worked out are negotiated. The House action was a rare break from that norm, and it caused real damage to thousands of real people. Fortunately, there was a substantial public backlash against the House Republicans, and they had to back down, and they let a short-term FAA extension pass. Then they backed off on their demand to kill the rule. But the powerful corporations behind this effort still couldn't let the issue go, despite the fact that the new rule had been in place for more than a year, has had absolutely no negative impact on any carrier. The union success rate in elections has remained roughly the same before and after the rule's implementation. These corporations were still bound and determined to attack the National Mediation Board and to attack America's rail and airline workers and to punish them for having the audacity to stand up for what's fair. For having the audacity to stand up and say a no vote or a vote that's not taken shouldn't be counted as a no vote or a yes vote. It shouldn't be counted at all, which I think most Americans would think makes sense. So these corporations got their friends in the House Republican leadership to demand the addition of burdensome new changes to the Railway Labor Act in this unrelated FAA bill. The dramatic changes they initially demanded to this statute were absurd. It would have been irresponsible to slip into a non-amendable conference report without any consideration by the Committee of Jurisdiction, which happens to be the jurisdiction that the committee that I chair here in the Senate. Fortunately, Senator Rockefeller, the chairman of the committee, Commerce Committee, and Senator Reid, through months of negotiations, were able to stave off the worst of the House Republican proposals and ultimately settle on a package of less detrimental changes. Under this new language, the agency retains discretion to determine when a union should be properly certified as a bargaining representative. And we have no intention of changing that process. I also think that we've left a lot of room here for the agency to make rules that govern special situations, such as mergers. But to be clear, I don't think any of us on this side of the aisle wanted to make these changes at all. We were forced to do this by a few powerful people who were willing to hold many thousands of American jobs hostage holding hostage improvements to our airway system just to get this. Now, some people might call this process a compromise, but I call it an abuse of our legislative process, and we shouldn't let it happen. Now, to be clear, as I've indicated, there is progress in this bill for the people of my state and the people of this great nation. It will create jobs. It will move our country's aviation system into the 21st century. It shifts our air traffic control system to a GPS system. Planes can fly far more efficiently, saving fuel and time. It provides a compromise that continues the essential air service program. So again, I want to thank Chairman Rockefeller for his diligence and his hard work over 4 years of trying to lead the House and others into moving our air transportation system, both for general aviation and for air transport and for the airlines, to be more efficient and to use less fuel, more benign to our environment. Believe me, there's a lot in here that's going to help general aviation also. So I thank Senator Rockefeller for his diligence and his hard work on this. So my vote today, my vote no on this bill is not to suggest that there aren't many good things in this bill. But instead, my vote is to stand up against the notion that a federal agency and the American workers it is charged to protect should be punished for doing what is right and what is fair, what is in their jurisdiction, and to stand up against a process that allows the few and the powerful to hijack this body and change the rules of the game in their favor. The American people deserve better than that. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
And the Senate again in a quorum call debating FAA reauthorization through 2015, and a final vote on the bill is scheduled for 5:30, with 60 votes needed to pass before it goes to the President. The House...
Republican colleague, Senator Hutchins, is not on the floor at the moment, but I do not know of, or have I heard of, any other members.
The Senator's reminded we're in a quorum call.
Mr. President, I ask unanimously that the order of the quorum call be rescinded.
Without objection.
The earlier part of my remarks is already on the record, so I'll just continue. And so I don't know that we really need to do much except to go ahead and vote. And I don't have the power to command that. I see a whole lot of people up here who do. But I would just say that if there's anybody at the last moment who wants to speak, that's fine, but we're certainly meant to vote by 5:30. I think there are a lot of our colleagues who are not going to get back here until about 5:30 because they're coming on airplanes that will land at about 5. So we have to take that into consideration. So I'm simply standing here to say that I happen to think this is a very, very good bill. And I think it's been mentioned often, it's a 4-year product of hard work with unbelievable consultation with all of the stakeholders, which includes all of the members of the Senate and their staffs and all of the people out in the world of aviation. I mean, we have spent endless hours with them and rightly so, and happily so. I think there's general support in the aviation community for this bill. I could read a list of all the people who do support this. It would take me a long time, of the associations who do support it. And I would hope very much that my colleagues would vote for this bill. As I indicated, nobody got all that they wanted, but that's the nature of compromise, and compromise in and of itself is particularly difficult in this negotiation. But we've done what we've done. It's well regarded, and I urge my colleagues, when they do come, to vote for the bill. I thank the presiding officer and yield the floor. And I yield back all time on our side. I can't do that for the other side. And so I would note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
And the Senate again going back into a quorum call as they wait for members to come back from their states. They're debating the FAA reauthorization through 2015, and a final vote on that is scheduled for 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time, about a half an hour. 60 votes needed to pass before it goes on to the President's desk. And the House approved the FAA reauthorization last week. Today in the House, possible work on amendments to a bill that would create a centralized process to consolidate or sell non-military property. And we expect that debate to happen about 7 o'clock Eastern Time. And later tonight here on C-SPAN 2, after the Senate gavels out, we'll bring you the communicators at 8 o'clock Eastern on the automobile industry and Internet technology. And after that, former Middle East peace envoy Dennis Ross. He'll talk about Israel's position in the Middle East from the Aspen Institute during an event that happened earlier today. That'll be at about 8:30 Eastern Time.
Mr. President?
The senator from Delaware.
Mr. President, I ask that the quorum call be vitiated, please.
Without objection.
Mr. President, you, my colleague from Delaware, have heard me say more than a few times, when we meet people who have been married a long time, I like to ask them, what's the secret for being married 50 or 60 or 70 years or more? And I get some really funny answers. I also get some very poignant answers. And sometimes I get very instructive answers. And one of the best answers I've ever heard, in fact, I've heard this more than a few times over the years, is the key to a long marriage, a successful marriage, is the 2 C's. The 2 C's. Not Coons and Carver, not Coons and Carney, not Coons and Castle, but the 2 C's, communicate and compromise. Communicate and compromise. And the folks from Delaware who elect us and people from the other 49 states are wondering, why don't we do the 2 C's more here? Because those two qualities, communicating and compromising, are actually not only successful for, or needed for a successful marriage, but also for democracy to succeed. And today, as we prepare to vote on the final conference report, a compromise, it's a product of a whole lot of communication from people all over the country, from businesses, from air traffic controllers, from labor unions, for people who use airlines, for folks who are involved in sometimes direct or indirect ways with this legislation. But they've been communicating with us what they thought we should do. And as we seek to bring our air traffic control system into the 21st century, and as we seek to fund the modernization of our airports and our airways, we've had to raise some money. And I was privileged to serve on the Commerce Committee for a while with our chairman, Senator Rockefeller, and boy, forever we're trying to work out a compromise between the airlines and the general aviation community on how do we pay for this tab so that we don't just run the deficit up even more. And I take my hat off to the chairman and others who worked on this with the key stakeholders to say, well, they're going to raise some revenues. They're going to actually pay some additional tax monies to come up with the money we need to provide for better airports and, frankly, better air traffic control systems, safer air traffic control systems, more efficient air traffic control systems, better results, maybe not for less money, but better results for a little bit more money. But it's been an ongoing communications for several years, an ongoing dialogue that's actually led us today to, I think, a very good compromise. One of the things that we're often told here in these jobs is we talk with consultants who talk to us about messaging and how do we message or talk about certain things. And among the things they tell us is never use the word infrastructure. Don't tell your constituents about we're working on infrastructure. They don't know what you mean. Instead, we should talk about roads, highways, bridges. We should talk about railroads. We should talk about canals or ports. We should talk about water or wastewater treatment systems. We should talk in our state about the dune system that protects our coastal beaches. We should talk about dredging a channel in a place like the Delaware Bay or Delaware River in an environmentally safe way. We talk about levees. We talk about the deployment of broadband across our country. That's all infrastructure. That is all infrastructure. And you know what else is infrastructure? Our airports. Our airports. And the airways, the air traffic control system that is used to dispatch planes and make sure that they go where they're supposed to go and land where they're supposed to land and fly safely throughout the day and through the night. In the state of Delaware, Mr. Chairman and Mr. President, as my presiding officer knows, our presiding officer knows, we have 3 counties. The largest county in Delaware is called Sussex County. It's the 3rd largest county in America. And the county seat of Sussex County is a place called Georgetown. And just on the outskirts of Georgetown, the town is several thousand people, we have an airport, or an air park as we call it. And there's an effort to try to expand the length of one of the runways. One of the runways is about 3,000 feet, the other is about 5,000 feet. And the county, which sort of manages the air park in Georgetown, they would like to expand the longest runway from 5,000 to 5,500 feet to 6,000 feet. Why? Because by doing that, we provide a nurturing environment by improving that infrastructure, in this case the length of the runways, and the navigational system, the lighting systems that's associated with the airport, we make it an easier place, a safer place to fly in and out of, and we increase the likelihood that it's going to be used. By whom? Well, then it's going to be used by, among other things, not just 737 aircraft, but 757s. Because there's a company there called PATS, P-A-T-S, that works on airplanes, some very expensive executive jets, 737s, and their cargo planes and passenger planes, and they help make sure they have larger fuel tanks so they can fly further, safer. And in some cases, they work on the insides of these really exclusive executive jets and Tony them up and make some money doing that, and they fly all over the country, all over the world. That work takes place right in Sussex County, Delaware, at the Georgetown Airport. They need to increase the length of the runways. This legislation will help make that possible over about a two-stage period over the next maybe 18 months or so. And they need at Georgetown, they need to be able to take out some hindrances to safe travel of airplanes, including maybe trees in some parts of the runway, approach or the takeoff, the departure side of the runway. Need to be able to put in some better navigational systems, better lighting, to make sure the big planes can get in and out safely. And more people, more work can be done by PATS. We're going to hire more people. There's a guy from West Virginia that the chairman knows well. We're both from West Virginia. I'm a native West Virginian. He's lived there and governed there and served as their senator for a lot longer than I lived there as a kid. But there's a guy named John Chambers, whom Senator Rockefeller knows well, whose parents are, I think, still there. I think they taught maybe college or, so I don't know if they taught at West Virginia Wesleyan when you were president, but John Chambers' parents have, I think, both been teachers, maybe professors. John Chambers runs Cisco. He started Cisco, a big technology company. And John Chambers is fond of saying that the jobs in the 21st century are going to go to the states or the nations that do two things well. Two things well. Number one, create a world-class productive workforce. People can come to work, do a job, and do it in an efficient way, using technology. And the second thing he says, the jobs of the 21st century will go to places where the infrastructure is world-class. The infrastructure is world-class. With this legislation today, we're going to make sure that the nation that really started all this, aviation with the Wright brothers, and actually got us not off on the right foot, but off on the right wing all those years ago, that we're going to be in a position to reclaim that mantle and to again show the rest of the world how to do it right, to strengthen our infrastructure, bring our infrastructure into the 21st century, be able to fly planes safer, out of airports that are better configured, better manufactured, better constructed, more wisely invested in communications and navigational systems and the right length, width of runways, and to make sure that the folks that are controlling our aircraft are doing a better job, using all the tools in the toolbox. I had a chance to fly as a naval flight officer for about 23 years, 5 years in a hot war and another 18 years in a Cold War, till the end of the Cold War with the Soviets. And I've flown in and out of a lot of airports, naval bases, and other military bases with my crews on active duty and reserve duty. And I had spent a little time as chairman did, as governor of my state, and as the commander-in-chief of the Delaware Air National Guard, Delaware National Guard. And so these are issues I've actually thought about a whole lot, as somebody who's actually been in airplanes, a whole lot of airplanes over the years. And I feel better about the men and women who are flying airplanes in uniform and flight suits going forward. I feel better with this investment, this legislation today, about the folks that will be flying in commercial airlines, whether they're from the U.S. or some other country, because of this legislation, this compromise. And then I feel better about people flying in what I call those teeny weenies, where they happen to be little Pipers or Cherokees or whatever, or where they happen to be some of these really exclusive executive jets that we see zipping around West Virginia and Delaware and other places. So it'll be a safer way to travel, and it's going to be an investment that's going to help create jobs, including in Georgetown, including in Georgetown, Delaware, including in West Virginia. So for everybody that's been a big part of bringing us to this point, to our friends over in the House who were able to communicate and compromise with us, and to our chairman of this committee, and to our ranking Republican on the committee who's not on the floor right now. Just take my hat off to you for getting us to this day. This is a good day. This is a happy day for us here in this body, and I think it's a happy day for the United States of America. We've actually shown we can actually sometimes get things done that have a good and a positive impact on our states and on our nation. With that, I yield the floor, and I don't know if there's anybody else who seeks recognition, Mr. President. If not, then I would make just note that the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Kaka.
The Senate taking another quorum call as they continue debate on the FAA reauthorization, and that would fund the FAA's programs through 2015. A final vote on that coming up, expected in about 15 minutes, 5:30 Eastern Time. 60 votes needed to pass it before it goes on to the President. And just some information, a report on Iran and some sanctions that have been going into effect today. A report from the AP talking about new sanctions on Iran and some Senate action there. That the tough new sanctions are being enforced on Iran's central bank because of the country's nuclear program. President Obama had sent a letter to Congress saying more Iran sanctions were warranted. And last week, the Senate Banking Committee approved penalties on Iran that were aimed at the country's Revolutionary Guard Corps and would require companies that trade on U.S. stock exchanges to disclose any Iran-related businesses to the SEC.